We used to revere all our resources. We had the water god, we had the sun god, we had Bhumi Mata. But today we are dumping garbage into our rivers and then saying there is no water. So where is all that gone? Simple, sustainable solutions. We were always very simple. We used to farm, we used to have our tillers. So simplicity and cost effectiveness has to be maintained. We are intrinsically green. We like fresh vegetables. We like markets, open markets. Do we really need malls? Do we need a refrigeration system which is required, which is cumbersome, which is consumes so much of energy? So what is an India-centric sustainability strategy? Contained urbanization is definitely a must. There should be a boundary for cities. And beyond that boundary, which is sacrosanct, I don't think a city can grow, because I don't think planners can plan for something which is infinite. We have what is called as an urban sprawl today. The highway from Bangalore to Madras is one continuous ribbon development. Instead, if we have growth nodes, if Kanjivaram, which is historically a temple town, can develop on its own USP, and whereas Sriperumbudur can grow on its own specific USP, being an industrial area, and you have Chengalpet, which can grow differently, but they are all connected by roads. So you have these decentralized nodes of growth and fantastic connectivity in terms of physical communication as well as data, cabling, internet, etc. Then why would people even want to walk to work tomorrow? Today it might sound a little vague, but it is happening. People are working from home. Okay, we have to discipline ourselves in a certain way to say that yes, during office hours we will work. And the office has to be confident that the person at home is doing office work at that time. That amount of diligence is to be instilled in the individual, but it will come. So what is achieving holistic sustainability? Having our rich heritage, having our art, craft, combining it with technology, combining it with all the smart gadgets that are available. It's quite ironical because, earlier, people were only considered smart. So being smart was within you. But today, you're looking at things outside you for being smart. So what's going to happen to you? Then in the World Economic Forum, what I am doing is I'm part of the Design Innovation Council, and I'm developing what is called as a Reciprocity Design Index, which is like a mantra for urban design, inclusive urban design with all the stakeholders, where stakeholders don't work in silos like in our country, where the MRT doesn't see, for example, in Bangalore, it's so sad that the MRT has come up on MG Road, and it has killed MG Road. The idea was that the MRT should make MG Road more accessible. The scale of the project that has come up on the MG Road has killed MG Road, and you find all the businesses that were there, which are so Bangalore, are all moving out because of this monstrosity. So is that the way to plan? Shouldn't we have had an idea of what it will do to the retail around it? Do we need stations which are so humongous and are retail oriented just to give income to the railways? So establish benchmarks for these attributes, identify a reciprocal design index by which cities can be measured for holistic sustainability, and compute the RDI for any city. So this will primarily be a checklist, and then it will help you to evolve. So if you have missed out on something, that you missed out on something, and you keep improving yourself till you achieve, the numbers that you want. And you are able to say, well, we are the best in the world. So this is what I wanted to talk to you about and share with you. And I think it's a little bit of a tangent from all the sessions today. But I think it is very relevant, because if we need growth happens in our cities, and the cities are taking the brunt of it. And we need to sensitize ourselves and understand where we are going wrong and how we can use technology and smart gadgets to help us build on our intrinsic strengths. Thank you.
Profuse apologies, and as Sheila was talking of smart cities, I left Secretariat at 1 minute past 3. I was in the car and I reached here in 4 hours, 4:25. It took us, I was at the Meridian at 3:50. I got on the flight over at 3:50. So it took me 30 minutes to cover the last probably 150 meters. Anyway, we've been talking of smart cities, and I'm going to be emotional on the subject because I'm very concerned about the future of the next generation. I must tell you a little anecdote in my life, how Mahindra World City Chennai was born. Any one of you seen Mahindra World City Chennai? I would request you, not because we have done it, but just go and have a look. And what future cities should look like is not what I'm saying they should look like that, but at least it has a seed of what the future cities should look like. Let me tell you how the thought came to me. It was one evening, it was I think about 8:45, and my executive assistant, who was an engineer from IIT and an MBA from one of the very bright schools, I think it was IIM Calcutta. He came to say good night, and I said, Naveen, how's your daughter? He had a child about a few months ago. And he started weeping. His eyes were moist. I said, Naveen, your daughter is not well. He said, no, sir. When I leave for work, she's sleeping. And when I come home, she's sleeping. So I don't get to see her. Now, here is a boy who sat with probably 20 lakh students to get into IIT. Sat with another 3 to 4 lakh students to get into an IIM, lives 2 hours away from work. He was not poorly paid. He was a youngster. I think at that time he was about 15 or 16 lakhs, which is not a bad salary for somebody who's under 30. But for 40 or 50,000 rupees a month in Bombay, you can only get a flat in Kandivali. He used to spend 2 hours at work to come back. And that's where I said to myself, that these young boys and girls deserve a better quality of life. And I think they need to be given a place where they can work, live, learn and play, and not spend 4 to 5 hours a day commuting to work, in pollution, in tension, in stress. Now let's look at the other dimension. About 200 million people are going to migrate from rural India to urban India in the next 15 to 20 years. And you're seeing the state of our cities. And I can count on my fingers some new developments that have happened. I think the oldest is Chandigarh, then came Bhubaneswar, then came Gandhinagar. There are only few. And on the recent times, we've had Gurgaon and Noida. I don't see any other, at least around Mumbai, nothing has come out. Now, so the topic today is townships moving to smart cities. So I am saying that we have to start thinking, and there are some basics. If I have to owe the credit for success of Mahindra World City, I think the number one factor is connectivity by rail. I think that's what really changed. And I don't know how many of you know that I have a lady sitting on my right. I don't want to name her. She helped us build the first private railway station. I don't think anybody has built a railway station in this city, in this country. And we handed over to the city, to the railways. And that actually changed. So if you have the basics, you can get the connectivity done. What is it that is required? Now, I have on my left somebody who works for Cisco who can take and talk of the technical aspects of smart cities. I have on my right, immediate right, one of the most experienced architects in the country. I have on my extreme right, since I work closely with her, so I will not praise her in public because otherwise my cost of drawings will go up. I think it requires only one small thing. It requires a little bit of change in mindset. We have built platinum certified buildings. Out of the first two platinum certified buildings which were completed, residential buildings which were completed, our company had the privilege of doing one. Can anybody guess how much it cost us extra? It did not even cost us 5% extra. And the operating cost for our customers, in fact, it was not even 5%, it cost us a few hundred rupees. So it's about 1% or 1.5% of what you're talking about. It's not a big deal. But we need to change our mindset on how to think. Do you know that in Mahindra World City, Jaipur, 45% of the water that we use is actually the sewage water of the city. Because we were sensitive to the fact that Rajasthan is a water deprived state. And since the Chief Minister was very keen for us to put up a city which will develop the largest IT park in the country, she was willing to give us anything. But we as developers said that we will not use any fresh water. It was a selfish reason, I must admit. The selfish reason was that we did not want enemies around us, because if the water was diverted, there would have been some public resistance to that because somebody would have been deprived. Just imagine when I first gave the thought to my engineers, what sort of reaction they would have thought. In Hindi, there is a word called Sathyana. When people get 60, which is Sat, they say Sathya gaya, matlab he is gone off the rocker. So the first thing they said, ki Nanda is Sathya gaya. But give me one cogent reason that why in a city which requires air conditioning for 7 months in a year or 8 months in a year, we have to use fresh water when the rest of the city does not have water for more than 2 hours a day. Why do we have to use fresh water for flushing? I can understand we can't use recycled water for sensitive purposes for bathing. For flushing, we don't know. What did it cost me? A couple of 100,000 feet of pipes, because you have to write a grey water pipe, you have to run a treated water pipe, and you have to run a potable water pipe. That's all, no? When you look at the overall cost of the project, it's not some very large big deal. The state brings the sewage water at the border of the Mahindra World City, which is partially treated. We do tertiary treatment. The water costs me 10 paise as against 20 rupees for fresh water. So I will recover the cost of the water in a few years' time. It requires just a mindset. Tell me that how many countries have the sort of sunlight that we are privileged to have? I believe, I have not seen it. Terry have just completed a building in Delhi where by just pumping in air 20 feet below the ground, and then pumping it into the system. So there's just a fan, there's no cooling. Because 20 feet below the system, below the land, below the earth surface, the temperatures are in the range of 25 degrees. So they are able to maintain temperatures in the office building at 26 degrees without air conditioning. You might come and say that in air conditioning we use 22. But how many of us do you really want to be in 22? You get into 22, then you want a blanket to sleep. Sheila told you about this whole system of building a pond near a temple, if you ask me, was primarily for water harvesting. Because money was spent around that period, it was, and we gave it because water was sacred, we gave it sacred so that people will not go and dirty the water and preserve the water. You know, if you go back into religion, lot of things in religion were because there were no laws at that time. So the priest used religion to enforce discipline. You know, the Jains say don't eat after sunset. It was put at a time when there was no refrigeration. You did not know what you were eating. Certain religions say that you should not eat milk and non-veg together. The whole reason was there was no refrigeration. Both milk and non-veg tend to get spoiled faster than vegetables, and so they said don't do it. Similarly, water was not done that way. I personally feel that there are three things that as we walk out of this room. One, I think we owe it to the future generations to leave a better quality of life. And as a lot of people say, what we have today is not what we have inherited from our forefathers, but something which we have borrowed from our future generations. And I think sensitivity does not cost much money. It's just going to be a thing. The second thing is that all we need is, there's enough technology available. It's a myth, and I'm not talking from theory. I'm a practicing professional. It does not cost much to get smarter in building smarter cities. Do you know that in Mahindra World Cities and in Jaipur, we've already got, when we planned our roads, we've got planning done that if tomorrow the population goes to 100,000 people working and 40,000 families living, we already have a provision for monorail so that when we have to build it, we don't have to create problem that we are seeing today, because the median has been left to do that. So we had brought somebody called Wilbur Smith from Canada, who designed and put it back. In an overall project which cost me 3,000 crores, a $200,000 cost does not even go into rounding off. And by that $200,000, I have saved my customers millions of rupees of discomfort, oil, loss of work, none. So, so I can give you examples galore on how it can be done. Let me move to the third thing that I wanted to tell you, is that it is better we as developers make the rules ourselves rather than a theoretical politician sitting down or a bureaucrat sitting down and putting rules into the system. CRZ is a typical example of that. I don't know how much CRZ affects Mumbai, but in Chennai, but in Mumbai it is a disaster. Nowhere in the world a coastline tourism says you should be 500 meters from the sea. There could have been better ways to deal with, whether it is cutting down the sand dunes or whether it is cutting down the growth of vegetation that is there, or making sure that pollutants don't go into the water. Then saying, and so all I'm telling you, my young friends, that let us become conscious, let us bring self-regulation to ourselves rather than a theoretician coming and making laws, because it will come and you'll suffer for it. With this, I'm going to request Mr. Raghavendran from C.R. Narayana to, because he is a true practicing technician. I'm a dumb accountant who somehow got into this business. So Mr. Raghavendran through you.
It was inspiring address, starting with Sheila and subsequently by Mr. Nanda. As he admitted himself, an emotional but a very insightful speech. If you call yourself dumb, I don't know what you can call ourselves. We have to call our
boys and girls don't get into engineering schools, they go into BCom.
I've had the chance to be in the first session, and in fact, I should say the session started off very well. We had three brilliant overview of what's happening. One, of course, from the governmental side, and then from Mr. Mandriwala, who actually outlined the 11 outstanding steps. I should really think that these 11 steps, if they actually get into a larger framework of how to take this the movement in terms of housing and urban development, I think we could really take into create a sea change here. But basically, what everybody has been talking of is the big time has arrived in terms of urbanization in India, and we have not seen this kind of urbanization that's happening now or going to happen in a bigger way in the next decade or two. Now, how prepared are we to face this kind of challenge? The challenge that we have to face doesn't come just as an outcome of how much of money that you allocate for this urban development. In fact, if you sometimes look at the budget allocations at the center, we're running into several lakh crores on this. One doesn't know where it goes. But that's besides the point. But it's much more than that. In fact, we're talking of we are talking of really overlaying the development over an established and functional cities that have all of our cities have grown, not in a flash, except some of the examples that was given by Mr. Nanda, but they all had a history of centuries in which they've grown. And now we are overlaying on the same city, on the same network, a completely new style of life, new style of living, which is vastly different than what happened 30 years ago. The communication, the transport, the way of business, the way of life, everything is changing. The way of entertainment, the way of education, all this is changing rapidly. And then we are overlaying a new way on an old pattern. And we are not able to reconcile these two. We neither have the overall framework in terms of a governance to manage these kind of overlay. In fact, when we talk of smart cities, I think the first essential thing for smart cities would be smart governance. I think smart governance is absolutely important, and the rest of it will follow. Smart environment will follow, because everybody is today aware, much more aware than what they were about 5 or 10 years ago, thanks to several movements. Of course, IGBC, part of which I am, has contributed substantially. Then there is TERI, then there's the ECBC, then there's the NMRE. All this have really brought the thought of sustainability into a common man's mind. Now everybody wants to do their bit. And therefore, in doing this kind of overlay, there's not a single stakeholder who says, I'll not build a sustainable home, or I'll not build a sustainable office, or a sustainable city. Nobody is against it. But are we seeing it in enough intensity to make a transformation of the way we live, or the transformation of the way we consume our resources? It's not happening enough. And I think, therefore, the basic change that we need is, as Mr. Nanda said, a change in mindset. I think the mindset is not enough, just the hundred of us sitting here, but it goes far beyond amongst people who really matter. And I think that kind of mindset change in being able to do things in a smart way, to create a framework an organizational framework of governance which builds in, which recognizes the factors of enterprise from people. In fact, what do we see today all over? We see a lot of new developments happening in a small way, dotted across the cities, and you know, like Mahindra World City, you enter, you have chaos outside, you enter, then you have a haven created in that area. And we have dots of mosaic spreading across our cities, whichever city you take. But where do we see this integrating? And we are living in a connected world today, and we are not able to connect this kind of development across different dots that we see here and there. Now, how do we, in the next 20, 30 years, if you're going to urbanize this to this extent, that somebody put a figure of 500 new towns required in India in the next 20 years. I mean, these are numbers, but basically they say that a huge number is required. Now, how did the other countries manage it? In mid 20th century, all this new town movement came up in the UK, or you know, the father of town planning, Ebenezer Howard, came up with a city. And you know, that was suitable for an English way of life and a European way of life. And you also see the American way of handling this growth, urban growth, and they went into the other opposite. They gave such an importance to a car, and they went into suburbs. The car became the focus of life, and everything was driven by an automobile. And of course, the highways, all that came through, and then the industry, the employment, the economy, everything built around the automobile in that context. Now, the concept that suits India is basically one of transport, smart mobility. And you know, today, even advanced countries like Denmark and Netherlands, their plan, not in terms of tackling transport problem, but their plan in terms of reducing the carbon footprint and to become a smart carbon economy, which they've all committed to as a result of several global meets, is to bring closer to public, anybody, anywhere in the country, within 300 meters of walking distance, you have a public transport, a dependable and safe public transport available within 300 meters of wherever they live in the country. Of course, they're small countries, they're not as big as India. But here, what kind of public transport we see? We see total chaos, and of which I was a victim, just as bad as Mr. Nanda was. You have transport systems governing the city development. Entire Mumbai development has happened because of two railways. The two railways travel in two linear directions, therefore we see the entire development happening along this. You see, in Chennai, there was recently an article in the Hindu, something about the river development along the OMR. Now, OMR has gone flat out in one direction, and beyond 100 meters or 200 meters of OMR, you see absolute disinterest and absolute lack of development. Instead, if this development has been more widespread, more concentrated, more focused development all around, you could actually service the transport and service the utilities in a much better way. So I think this kind of integration of transport, integration of you know, a healthy life, integration of affordability, all of these things have to be integrated and formed at various levels, and we have to recognize the initiative of the private developers who, on their own, are today substantially contributing to the green building movement, and you know, they are to such an extent that the focus of all the development is a person who wants to own a home. Now, today, amongst the various aspirations of what one owns as a home is a deep aspiration that his home should be a green home. I mean, this is cut across, and today the schools, the children at school, they are aware of what is green. They're, you know, thanks to several interest groups which are taking this kind of an education to the schools. And in the next, you know, as Mr. Nanda was saying, what you leave behind, definitely this set of children at the school today, when they get into their careers and professions, and when they start looking for homes, now is the choice that we have today, is it the choice that they have to have? I mean, they definitely ought to have a better choice than what we have today. And therefore, how do we actually sustain a movement which can actually promote a greater implementation of green projects, green way of life, green transport, green governance, and smart governance, and smart infrastructure? We have infrastructure which is absolutely disconnect. There's a huge disconnect between what infrastructure we. In fact, there's a big talk on several mention of infrastructure deficit that's happening, and therefore this integrated growth is what holistic growth is what I think is really essential. Is a focal point of what we are going to achieve in the next decade or so, decade or two. An integrated development in which all stakeholders come and connect up and stop this kind of disconnected individual acts of brilliance or act of innovativeness or act of acts of being a forerunner in any kind of a design or a green sustained building efforts. I mean, if in Rajasthan water was recognized as a problem and 45% of city waste are being used for development, now why can't that become a benchmark? Why can't that become a standard practice in all areas which are deficient in water? And there are several, including Chennai, several areas of a country are deficient in water. So there are examples, and there are ways to work on this, and there are ways to bring about. Now, how do we treat our resources? How do we treat our environment, and how do we treat in the process of development? If you really look at it, we have become so callous and negligent in all this. And where do we come from? We have come from a culture which has always remained close to a holistic, natural way of life. They are close to some of the slides that Sheila showed. You see how it is an intrinsic part of culture. And from there we have moved so far away that we are actually today sitting and rediscovering what we have lost, rediscovering what we all knew for centuries. And look at our waterways. Look at any developed city in the world, anywhere in any amongst several nations. If there's a river in the city, that river becomes a focal point of development. That river is a matter of pride to the city dwellers, and the river offers tremendously to the well-being of the city in terms of physical health, in terms of mental attitudes, in terms of emotions, and so on. So, what we have today, for an example being Chennai, we have a river which was initially, in fact, some was created subsequently by the British in the course of their occupation of this country, which was used from a very practical point of view. The Buckingham Canal, which is a natural rainwater carrier, and it kept the city without the threat of floods during heavy monsoons. It kept it very well in terms of picking up the surplus river water from different parts and discharging it wherever it was, and including recharging the ground. Now today, the Buckingham Canal has been killed in the garb of developing a metro railway. The metro rail that came, MRTS, that actually ruined the whole city. Now today, several parts of the city gets flooded, waterlogged, no way people can reach home. It brings unsanitary conditions at several parts of the city, all because the two integration of this transport corridor and the rainwater carrier, these two functions, they could have lived side by side, but instead one decided to go over the other and ruin and kill the whole environment as such. There are several examples like this in every city. We seem to be losing what we inherited and not really preserving and working more on this. Therefore, my overview on this whole development is that the dots of development, the dots of initiative that are happening everywhere, basically to meet the aspirations of an improving younger population with greater affordability. They're all looking for home, and after all, owning a home is a great feeling for an Indian. And therefore, when this kind of initiatives are taken, the integration of all these initiatives into a suitable framework, and I'm not really looking at the cliche that it's a private public partnership. I mean, that's a different territory altogether. But basically, promotion of this initiative into something more substantial, into something that can change the environment, improve the environment, consume less, pollute less, and use our resources more sensibly than what we did. I think this is the direction, and there's a big cry for this kind of a development, of a direction that we need in the coming decades. And should we attempt, in fact, India is in a great position because much of development of the country is yet to happen. The major infrastructure is yet to happen. Now, we don't have to rediscover the wheel elsewhere, but when we do it right, when we do it now, we should do it right, and we should do it sustainably, and we should do it in an adaptable manner, so that next time, in the future generation, when it tries to overlay over what we have built today, the overlay gets fitted up more easily than the conflicts that we see today. I was very absorbing to be here in the morning, and also to hear to my previous speakers. And I think we have one more speaker on networking. In fact, smart cities are built on networking of utilities and being able to monitor and control. And I would be as keen as you are in listening to the next piece. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Raghavendran. Bollywood stars in one, Aamir Khan and Shabana Azmi. Mr. Aamer Azmi.
First of all, being the last speaker in a panel, I would have regularly joked that this is called saving the best for last. But with such stalwarts before me, I'm actually shaking in my boots as to how I will hold on my own here. But Mr. Nanda, I think that story that you relayed about, the child and how the story of Mahindra World City was born, very moving. And I remember I was speaking to one of my colleagues once, and I asked him, how old are your kids? And he said, my oldest is this long and my youngest is this long. So what does that mean? He said, I only see them sleeping all the time, right? So very, very similar story. So thank you very much once again. And what I'm going to talk about is how do you actually leverage technology when you're starting to build new townships and new cities, right? Sheila introduced herself as an architect, Mr. Raghavendran being an architect. I'm also an architect, but from a technology perspective. Right? You've seen some of these numbers. I'm conscious of the time, so I'm not going to talk about all of these things, but there are some interesting trends out there, right? Okay, thank you very much. So globally, if you look at it, we're talking about 700 million people getting urbanized in the next 10 years, right? And as a technology company, what also interests us is there are 3 to 5 billion people who will be connected to the network in the next 20 years. That's an amazing number, right? And interestingly enough, we were talking about some of these numbers to an FMCG company. We said there'll be 5 billion people connected. I said, that doesn't make sense to me because our projection is in the next 20 years, there'll be only 3 billion people who will be using a toothbrush. So being in the East, we can understand that. Sheila's picture of a guy on a bullock cart with a cell phone, the guy probably brushes his teeth using a neem stick, right? So he doesn't use a toothbrush, but he uses a cell phone. So that's how prevalent technology is getting, right? So that is something that we are very keenly watching. But if you look at it, global energy demand going to double by the year 2030. But on the flip side, interestingly enough, there are about 1.5 billion people who still do not have access to electricity, right? So if you look at all of these things, that's where we are starting to put our minds together and say, as developers start to build these new cities, how can we as technologists come in and try and help solve some of these problems? Because obviously, we can't build cities on our own, right? And if we do, I urge you to stay away from them because they'll be nowhere as good as some of the other architects who are building them. The other interesting aspect you should look at is the significant social change that is happening out there, right? Today, 70% of India is still rural, right? Mr. Nanda talked about it, 200 million people moving from rural areas into urban areas, right? And 50% of new building construction is happening in Asia. So there is a lot of momentum in this part of the world. And interestingly enough, if you look on the energy side, this is an amazing statistic that I saw, which I didn't believe initially, but only 3% of buildings in the United States are LEED certified from an energy perspective, right? Things are moving, things are changing now. I think in India, we will probably see numbers improving, from that perspective already. And then some other interesting statistics, as we start to grow, as people come from rural areas into urban areas, you'll need schools, you'll need teachers. We will face a shortage of about 350,000 teachers, right? How do you solve these problems? One way is obviously to set up some training schools for teachers, etc., coax people to get into that profession. The other way is how do you leverage technology to do that, right? Virtual education. How can you use the same teacher to teach across multiple schools, whether it's in the same city or different cities? Things are happening right now as we speak, right? Same thing from a healthcare perspective, lack of doctors. And how do you leverage technology to bring healthcare, remote healthcare, to your doorstep or to the rural people, if you will? So network, in our opinion, is becoming increasingly the platform for all of these technologies, right? If you go back a few years, the network was only used purely for business purposes, right? Whether it was email or internet or whatever. Then in the next phase, it started to adopt a consumerish attitude, right? You start video communication between people is something you started to look at. Facebook, what a phenomenon today. I guarantee you, if you're not on Facebook, go back home and check your children are already there. Right? It is their mode of communication, and I have to take this opportunity to relate an interesting joke to you. I'm sure some of you would have seen this cartoon. A maid in Mumbai is called a bai. Right? So this cartoon shows a bai who comes home, and the lady of the house is saying, "Hey bai, where were you for the last 6 days? You didn't, tell us that you were going somewhere." She said, "Madam, I had updated my Facebook status that I was on vacation for the last 6 days." And then the other interesting comment she makes was, "And Saib commented on that and said, 'Come back soon, I'm missing you.'" So be careful what you do with social technology also, right? The other interesting aspect, the next technology that is moving, the next phase of internet rather, is what we call the Internet of Things, which is the industrial aspect of that, right? The real estate moving into, getting connected, physical security. If you go to places like Japan, for example, your refrigerator is connected to the network, right? So if you drink a glass of milk, by the time you're coming back home, you get an SMS saying, "Okay, your bottle of milk is over. Please pick one up before you come back home," right? So we are not talking of all of those things here. Those are advanced technologies, right? We will move there in India also eventually, but not now. We are talking of more realistic things of how do you use technology to manage your cities better? How do you use technology to provide a better quality of life to the people living in these new cities and townships, which eventually are going to become smart cities, as we spoke about, right? So this network as a platform is now beginning to create this whole new business model, right? Whether you look at energy, whether you look at education, healthcare, all of these verticals are now getting transformed by the use of this network as a platform, right? So you bring all of these things, you bring accessibility, you bring security, you bring all of these things in there. Energy, smart grid is the technology play there. How do you manage energy better from generation to distribution? How do you reduce the losses out there by using sensor technology? How do you, manage usage in the home through use of smart meters, etc., things like that. Yeah, when you talk of education, how do you leverage technology to manage that better by as I said, leveraging multiple teachers or the same teacher across multiple schools? One of our favorite projects as Cisco is in Korea. It's called Songdo. And there, what is interesting is the school has a technology that they're putting in where if your child is sick, your child actually does not have to miss any of the school work. Right? Children might not like that, but you can actually sit at home and log into whatever is going on in your school, and you're able to cover that sitting at home. This started off during the days of the H1N1 virus, when you contracted that virus. Nobody wanted you to come anywhere near that, right? So So this concept started there with virtual education, right? You look at retail, you look at government, and from a cities and townships perspective, we think what the future is what we call smart connected communities, right? Smart connected communities means to us is, if you look at any city today, and this doesn't have to be India, this is anywhere in the world, pick any city. You have so many different aspects in a city, so many different verticals in a city. All of them have a lot of information, but all of them keep that data within themselves, right? Keep that information within themselves. All of them are siloed, right? One of my favorite examples is an ambulance, which is going out from a hospital to pick up a person who's in need. Does that ambulance have enough information straight away available saying, okay, you need to go from here to there, avoid these roads because there is traffic on there, right? The answer is no. Does the traffic department have access to that information? The answer in most cases is yes. So they're not sharing that information, right? So what we are saying is, as you start to build these new cities, as you start to build newer townships, and your vision is to move them to smarter cities, you plan it early, you plan it at a stage where you're able to interconnect all of these things, where you're able to bring the data from all of these onto a common platform and give access meaningfully even to citizens living there, so you can improve their quality of life, if you will, right? The ultimate vision of doing this is not because we are a technology company and we want to push technology out there. That's not the reason. The reason is a sustainability aspect, right? And we are looking at sustainability from three perspectives. It's a social sustainability. How do you improve the quality of life using technology? How do you improve it from an environmental perspective, right? How do you save energy in these cities by doing multiple things? And there are various examples out there. And even from an economic perspective, right? There are lots of reasons for doing that, even from an economic perspective. So from a healthcare perspective, what I want to point out is this is a picture of the technology in actual use, right? High-end video conferencing being used. The doctor is sitting in a remote area. There is a nurse on the other side with a patient sitting there, and remote consultation going on, right? You might say, well, this is great for an advanced city, but let me tell you that Cisco has actually done some of this work as part of our corporate social responsibility. A few years ago, if you remember, there was a huge flood in Karnataka. Lots of villages were destroyed, and Cisco adopted one village in Raichur district. And we've actually set up this kind of a setup there. There is a doctor that we've tied up in Bangalore, and there is a remote, setup in that particular village in Raichur, right? So the patients come and sit there, and the doctor is consulting them remotely from Bangalore. The reason is, none of the young doctors are willing to go for a posting in Raichur, right? They want to stay in Bangalore, they want to stay in Mumbai and all of these. So this is how you're leveraging that. And initially when we started this pilot, people were afraid to come there. They said, where is the doctor? Because you want the doctor to feel your pulse the first thing you go there, right? But as they started to see this evolve, it took us, I don't know, maybe 3-4 months for the first patient to come in and sit there and say, okay, I'm comfortable with this now, right? Now there is a queue. The doctor who we had tied up with has actually put like 3 or 4 different doctors in shifts to manage that kind of a crowd, right? So again, as Mr. Nanda had mentioned, it's a change of mindset that is required, right? So that is something that we are seeing very actively in some of the areas in India itself. Some interesting results of having done this from a hospital perspective in the US, 40% reduction in emergency room visits. A lot of people visit emergency rooms because they're not feeling well and they don't know what to do, and they just rush there to see a doctor, right? So 40% reduction there. And the doctors, the hospitals are happy because they're able to manage their emergency room visits better because there are no false positives, if you will, that way, right? 63% reduction in hospital admissions because a lot of people who come in are taking a look at, or doctors are remotely taking a look at them. They don't even have to come to the hospital, right? So those are some interesting aspects that we're looking at. Education, as I said, doing this remotely, sharing a single teacher across that. Delhi Public School in Bangalore, for example, uses this across their multiple campuses, right? And if Chennai traffic is a problem, please come to Bangalore. You'll appreciate the Chennai traffic a lot more, I think. Lots of problems with traffic there, right? So a Delhi public school teacher going from one school to another, wasting like 1.5 to 2 hours shuttling from one school to the other. Now they've bought this technology from us where the teacher sits in one school and she's able to take remote classes without moving out, right? So she doesn't add to the traffic problem, she doesn't add to any of the other pollution problems, etc. So interesting use of technology again over there, right? Some other aspects of how that helps them. Smart grid, same thing as I mentioned. How do you optimize supply, reduce demand, because you're using your power better by using smart meters. You're avoiding losses and all that stuff, right? Retail, very interesting again. There is a new concept out there today. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar, called crowdsourcing, right? So crowdsourcing is nothing but getting opinion from the crowd about something you're doing. You know, friend sourcing, as I'm going to call it, is becoming very common today in the retail industry, right? You go to Facebook, and you know, as a responsible father, I always keep an eye on my kids' Facebook pages, right? You go there, you'll see interesting things, right? A guy taking a picture from a shoe store and immediately posting that from a smartphone saying, hey guys, what do you think about this shoe? Should I buy it? And he's waiting there for 5 minutes to get a response from his friends. And all of them are sitting there, right after school, looking at their Facebook pages. And four of them respond saying, oh, it looks wonderful, or it doesn't look good, or whatever. So that's becoming the future of retail, right? So people consulting each other real time on some of these things, right? Interesting things happening there in that perspective. The other thing, if you look at it, right, from a devices connected to the network, few years ago, about 2004, we had about 300 million devices connected, right? And we are very soon going to look at about 1 trillion devices connected to the network. And this is not because all of us will carry more cell phones. This is because a lot of the other non-traditional devices are getting connected to that. Today, smart homes has become a phenomenon, right? Wherever you go, whether you go in Mumbai or Chennai or Bangalore, everybody's talking about smart homes. And devices in the home are connected on the network. So you could actually log in from home and make sure that your door is locked. You could log in, sitting in your office to your home server or whatever you want to call it, and make sure that you've turned off the gas before you left, right? So all of these things are now possible. So all of these devices getting connected is opening up the avenue to provide a lot of intelligent services out there, right? But what this will do for smart cities and smart townships is basically enable productivity, right? Because, Mr. Raghavendran said, why do you even have to walk to work, right? That's an interesting concept. Cisco actually uses an interesting term, which we call don't commute to compute. So don't come to the office if you just have to check your email and do all of these things, right? Come there for social reasons. Come there to have meetings. Come there to meet your customers and all that, right? That is possible today. That is because all of these interconnected devices are enabling that productivity, right? Creating new services, as I talked about, a lot of services are possible by this. And obviously, sustainability is the ultimate goal for this, right? But to do all of this, you have to make sure that the digital and physical infrastructure have to be seamless, right? You have to start planning at an early stage, right? As a technologist, one of my pain points is when I go to a real estate developer, at least 5 years ago, right? The technology guy would be called in after the shell and core and everything is ready and say, okay, guy, now come and pull your cable and do your magic, right? You've already decided everything there, So what we are doing is, if you're creating a new city, if you're creating a new township or a home for that matter, get technologists involved early enough, because we will give you ideas on doing a lot of different things. One of them is, if you're building a large township, how do you actually avoid a lot of cabling costs by doing things intelligently, right? So CapEx reductions, OpEx reductions, energy saving techniques, a lot of these things. But the key criteria is obviously affordability, especially if you talk about it in India, right? So we are very, very conscious of that, right? things that work for us in Songdo in Korea, for example, we know for sure those things will not work in India, right? India is a different market. So we realize that and we bring solutions to the market which are in that affordability perspective. I met an interesting developer the other day, excuse me, and he said, a large portion of these technology solutions are for India. I need solutions for Bharat. And while you make fun of it, actually at the end of the day, there is a lot of value in that statement, right? So those are things that we are very, very concerned and care about. I talked about Songdo in South Korea, one of the world's greenest cities, I think, when it is completely built out. A lot of interesting work going on. And if you're keen on hearing more about it, offline, I'll give you more information on that. The other thing more closer to home, and if any of you happen to be in Bangalore, here's an open invitation to come and visit our campus in Bangalore, where we've tried to build it as a model for sustainability, right? So take time to visit us. One of the buildings there is a LEED Platinum certified building, where we've done a lot of these solutions ourselves that we talk about, right? So an interesting place to take a look at. So all of these things I'm talking about are not paperware, are not purely on PowerPoint. We're actually implementing them in a lot of places. And one thing that I'm very proud of is the work that we are doing for the Delhi-Mumbai Industrial Corridor. There are at least 2 cities that we are working with, where we are trying to build the ICT master plan, the IT master plan, at a very early stage when they haven't even started to dig the ground, right? So the people there have the vision to bring this, so that, in my opinion, and with a lot of other cities out there in India today also, will become the model of how new townships and new cities need to be created. Right? But what will it take to do this? First of all, there has to be visionary leadership. Right? There have to be people like, Mr. Nanda and some of the others who are recognized in the industry to take some of these bold decisions that he's talking about, right? Some of the decisions that he's already taken in establishing a city like that. And smart regulations. Regulations will have to be changed. There are some regulations, whether it's on the electricity side, if you want to enable things like smart grid, regulations on the general development control regulations, for example, if you want to bring some of these smart city aspects, etc. Private-public partnerships are required if you're getting into larger cities and trying to do these things in larger cities, right? And obviously, new ecosystems are required, right? Companies like Cisco would never have been invited to a real estate conference before, right? Because we used to be a box mover. We used to be people who sold, straightforward routers and switches. But now we are taking a look at how to adopt, or rather adapt, our solutions into the real estate market. How do you improve, the quality of life of people by doing all of these things? So those new ecosystems are required, where you will have to, work with technology companies. You will have to work with a lot of other people out there. So basically, the way we look at it is smart cities and smart townships is nothing but creation of a new industry. It has, a lot of positive things out there. So it has to be a joint effort between the developers, the architects, and the technology companies. And I think once we do all of that, there'll be magic out there from a smart cities perspective. Thank you very much.
Just want to add, in fact, as Sheila said, trams are very common in Europe. In European cities, tram is the easiest way. You hop on and get off anywhere and all that. But the problem is our roads are already densified, so highly densified that, for instance, accommodating cars on the road, how justified are you? What percentage of public transport can handle population-wise, and how much do cars handle? Whereas cars are given the prime importance, not the pedestrians, not the cyclists, and not even the buses. The cars take the prime space, but they transport the least number of people. So the concept of cars being given importance is very prevalent in India. I mean, if you go to a local authority for an approval of a building plan, here they ask you to give you so much of car parking in your building. This is because they don't want your cars to be spilled on the road, parked on the road. And this number is going up year after year. It used to be X, now it's become almost 2X, 3X, and so on. Whereas you go to London or you go to any other well-developed cities with good public transport, they discourage you from providing for parking in your buildings. If you show 100 cars in your building application, and then you say, okay, I'll take 100 off, I'll just provide 5 for handicapped people, and they give you a bonus. That means they don't want you to bring your car into the city. So, if you don't bring cars to the city and develop trams as a public transport, it's an ideal combination.
Yeah, I think you are the best people to do it, sir. Just on a side note, today it's probably faster to get from point A to point B on a cycle than in a car. Thank you. And also, there is, I think, sorry, we have the gentleman in the back.
Yeah, good afternoon. I'm Ajay Karthik from Bureau Veritas. And this question is for Mr. Aamer. So you were talking about all these e-learning and e-doctor stuff and everything. So end of the day, do you feel the quality of a teacher exactly standing in front of you and teaching, and rather a computer or a display just monitoring and the students are able to see it? Or similar case, a doctor is just sitting remotely, maybe 100 kilometers far, and just consulting his patients. Do you see both the quality of the service, what the consumer gets, is not affected?
Good question. I think the results that I showed, and some of them I spoke about, actually speak for themselves, right? People are concerned about quality. That is why, as I said, when we started this in Raichur for the first 3-4 months, there was absolutely no patients coming in there, right? But when they started to see the advantage, and the advantage of that, by the way, is, you go to a local doctor who's a GP, a general practitioner, right? But here, since you're consulting remotely, if you have a health problem, this doctor in Bangalore immediately goes into the next room and calls a cardiologist, right? Who sits there in front of that and is able to diagnose the cardiac problem, right? So the access to all of these kinds of additional facilities makes it easier for people to adapt to cities. So the quality of service, I don't think is a problem at all.
What I feel is more than in teaching or in doctor profession, more than knowledge stuff, there is something called an emotional connectivity which happens in the classroom or maybe in a hospital, or when you meet a family doctor. See, I consult a doctor, tomorrow my kid consults the same doctor. So these sort of emotional things cannot be sustained in this sort of digital stuffs is what I personally feel.
I 100% agree with you. The emotional aspect cannot ever be replaced by technology. But we are enabling some of those things in areas where it is required, right? So yes, there are times when you might want to go to a doctor because there is a touch and feel aspect also, which is important. I know some of my family doctors. I grew up in Hyderabad. And I know some of my family doctors which never used to prescribe any medicine. They used to talk for 10 minutes with a patient, and that was enough for the patient, right? So those things are still there. Technology can never replace those aspects. I'm only talking about bringing remote, access to healthcare wherever it's required. So it's a mix on both sides in either way. Right?
Okay. Thank you.
If I can add to that, and that's why the first